Today we are going to look at onboarding, documentation and other knowledge transfer challenges. And Marek is our fireside chat speaker today and is the CTO at the Software House. Marek is a storyteller, mentor and scalability expert. Sorry, I don't know what happened to my sentence there.
If we call it this way.
Please do. So Marek and I are going to have a chat. I'm going to ask him some questions. We're also taking questions from the audience. And if, as an audience, as someone watching, you have a question at any point, please do put it in the chat straight away. I always prefer to have a conversation around the questions that the audience really wants to know about wherever possible. So if you do have a question, ask. Our session time actually is really quite short today. So the sooner you ask your question, the more chance we will have an opportunity to answer it. But while you don't ask questions, I get to ask my questions. I have loads of questions, loads of things I want to know about on this topic. So, Marek, maybe you can start us off by, we're discussing knowledge. So why are you a good person to discuss this topic with?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, congrats, Zoe, on yesterday's being an MC. Great job. And thank you for inviting me here. And hello, everyone on the audience. So maybe a little bit about what we do in the Software House is basically we build custom-made teams, like agile teams, multidisciplinary ones that can dive into our clients' code or solutions if they need to scale up their business. This is what we usually do. Sometimes we do things from scratch, but in the third decade of the 21st century, actually everybody has some technical stuff already. So it's not about doing things from scratch, but rather diving into something that it's already there. And this is when the challenge comes, because actually we can prepare this kind of team for the clients, but we need to learn their business and learn what they do quite quickly, because this is what they expected from us. And actually this is like the first step that we have in each of the corporations is actually to learn the client and to see what we are actually dealing with. And one of the first questions is, okay, so do you have any kind of documentation? Do you have any kind of materials on onboarding we can use, right? And sometimes the answer is like, maybe you can help us out with this as well, right? And we are this kind of hub between multiple clients, where we can see how onboarding process documentation looks at the variety of different companies. And we really see that everybody has a slightly different approach. And I have some thoughts that I can share today, hopefully.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, let's start, and let's we kind of trailed some different areas in the topic for this session. So let's start with onboarding. So what are your tips for creating an onboarding process?
Yeah. So first of all, you should have one. That's maybe the obvious one, because obviously everybody has some onboarding process, but it's very often not written down, which is not a good practice, because the onboarding should look the same for each of the newcomer. Whenever this is like a separate company or an employee, I often notice that sometimes somebody gets a very good onboarding and somebody gets quite bad onboarding, because it's, for example, done by a different person and you don't really have this kind of script or any kind of checklist, and you can always forget stuff. So it's good to have this kind of onboarding document. What do you actually want to achieve by this onboarding? What topics do you want to tackle? Create some kind of checklist. What are the most important stuffs for the company? So this is like a tip number one. It's also about not only on there are two kinds of onboarding. One is onboarding to the company, and the second one is onboarding to the particular project or particular technical thing that this person will be working on, right? And basically, I've seen a couple of times that we focus too much on onboarding to the project, giving the tasks and explaining these technicalities rather than first explaining the whole business, what's the company's culture, what are the main goals, right? So those are also the things that you should tackle at the first place before diving into this technical stuff, right? Um, Also, I think that I think that Tanisha mentioned that in her talk that actually she was talking about the mentoring, but basically it's about getting to know people. This is what I got from her presentation. Is that actually the very important part of the onboarding is to just get to know people, and in this way, it's better to automate all the stuff that can be automated. I mean, create any kind of videos or materials about this stuff that can really be read, can really be seen, right, and documented, and focus this onboarding procedure rather on meeting people in the company, getting to know the culture, and maybe just seeing what they mean by the stuff that was there in this documentation, and what's their perspective, right? And I think this is also quite important stuff.
Yeah, so the kind of
And
concept of flipped learning where you're using the time together to answer questions and almost like people can do the reading or the absorbing in their own time.
yeah, and what worked for us as well very well is ask for the feedback at the end of any onboarding. We actually asked this onboardee, right, to to give us some feedback about how what was the experience, and we actually learned a lot on this as well. That actually this is something that you can also constantly improve, and the onboarding process itself is a project, right? And you can always ask for the feedback, and actually you can learn a very interesting stuff after you hear this feedback from those people, what they were missing in this, what would be done better.
Or even to ask simply, what did they get from it? And see if that was what you intended them to get from it, or,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, you
identifying
should
gaps
always
that
do
way.
this. So we have this checklist about the most important stuff, for example, and at the end of any onboarding, we just go through this list one again and just do this double check. Okay, so have anybody told you about this? Have anybody told you about that? Right? And there should be like all yeses, right? And if not, it's like, okay, so let's talk about it right now, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's move on to, I mean, obviously it's related because you've already mentioned that as part of your onboarding, you're
Yeah.
probably going to want to create some documentation. But how do you develop good documentation practices in general?
Yeah, and this is, I think, what I wrote down some quotes from the previous talks. So I think that Joel actually told at the beginning that learning is to making people do things that they didn't do, or they don't really want to do, but maybe it's really helps them involve. And I think that writing the documentation is one of this kind of challenges that you really need to train people how to create a good documentation and how to embed it as a part of your culture. I think this is even a part of a of a this DevOps culture, because this means that you build, run it, but also maintain it. So how can you maintain it without any documentation, right? So actually, this is a kind of important stuff, and this is about teaching people how to actually quickly do the documentation in the project, because without the specific tools, if you just tell them, okay, so just write the documentation, They would just not do it, or they would do it once, and then
or maybe they'll do it badly, right? Because they're not thinking about who's going to use it. They're just doing something to get it done.
That's other stuff that you really need to have lots of empathy when creating the docs. So it's also connected with the onboarding. So well, at least for the developers, it works best if I tell them, so write this documentation in the way that you would read it yourself if you were like onboarded to the project, right? So what would be like letter to yourself? And but the crucial part is that you really have to maintain, especially in IT, you have to maintain the documentation all the time. I've seen a lot of documentations that they were created and then just left, and nobody updates that, and people just they say that we don't have a time for this. And that it's too complicated, but that what makes the documentation obsolete quite fast in IT. And actually, documentation without any kind of maintenance may be even counterproductive, because somebody can read something, think that this is for granted, and then somebody explains to them like, but it's not actually like this anymore, right? Yeah. So you really have to work on people to actually maintain the documentation. It's what sometimes works is creating this kind of ownership, that you assign a particular part of the system or particular issue to a particular group or particular person, and you say that, okay, so you're the owner of this invoicing system, right, or something like that, and basically you need to keep a track also on the documentation and about everything in the system. You don't actually need to do it by your own hands. This is not the ownership. You just need to take care that it's handled, right?
Yeah, super. Well, I'm going to switch now. We've got a first question in from the audience, which I'm really excited about. I do encourage everyone to keep asking questions because our time is going to be over before we realise it. So the question is, what's the average duration of onboarding? And I think this is a super interesting question, because I can see that on one hand, you want to get it done super quick, right? Because you've got all this important information. You want someone to have it and be ready to go. On the other hand, it's going to take some time for people to digest it, and actually, at what point does onboarding even end? So yeah, what do you do?
Yeah, well, actually, I have asked the same question to my managers before this. The answers varied from 1 week to 1 month, but basically, this is our statistics. It's usually. If the usually it works in the way that person can really start doing some tasks after 1 week, but he or she is not like let's say fully functional, right? But already can add some value to the process. After 1 month, usually it's like a fully functional team member, and then after 3 months, it's this moment when a person can actually be on board there, right? So this person that actually brings somebody else to the table.
Great, fantastic. I think that's a great answer. All right, let's have a chat now about, even more generally, out to general knowledge transfer. So how do you ensure good knowledge transfer, beyond just documentation and beyond just onboarding?
Yeah, so maybe I will define first what I mean by this term, because I also heard that this term might have a different definitions. So for us, at least, what we call a knowledge transfer is that we have over 100 people here working on more than 20 projects at once for different clients. And actually, what we need to do is to make sure that if somebody did something in the project A, we don't reinvent the wheel one more time in project C, right? But obviously, each of those team members, they work in their separate projects. So how to make sure that they actually have this environment to share this knowledge. But it's not only for the company like us, because I've also seen it in the bigger organizations, that they also have this kind of teams that actually they do the same thing in their own teams, and they have completely no clue that actually somebody did that in some other team, and they're actually we are sometimes this kind of trigger that we come to the company, and we first do these interviews with a couple of groups, like what do you do, right? And suddenly we say, okay, but do you know that those guys already did it, right? And say, whoa, really, right? And and yeah, so this is what I mean by knowledge transfer, is to make sure that everybody in your organization knows the same stuff, or at least knows where that it has been done, and actually they can ask somebody for help in this matter, right? And
Yeah.
and we have built two tools here. One is a knowledge base based on Confluence. What Hywell, I think, also mentioned, that the knowledge is the first step for knowledge is looking into the Confluence knowledge base. I will just add on top of that you need to have it very well structured and searchable, because I think this is the most important part, is that actually people know how to use it, and it can become very complex over time. And we add tags, for example, and we try to define it into the categories in the way that actually, if you are looking for some problem, you will find the answer, because the best answer is worth nothing if you cannot look
Yes.
it up, right? And
Absolutely.
so you really have to work on your structure. And then also I see that it's also about promoting a good examples to make it a living thing. You have to really look for those cases when somebody used that. Somebody just looked for some information, found it, and used it, and then you have to promote it. Really, like, hey, you see, it's working. It's really working. So you can you please commit to this knowledge base as well, right?
Yeah.
And this is what usually works. And the
Yeah, it's the
second tool that
cultural side as well as the technical side, right?
It's about this culture of sharing things, right? So it works in a way that if you get something from the community, you want to give something back, right? So
Yeah.
it's at the beginning is this chicken and egg problem, because you have to somehow engage people into doing these commitments, but also it's about promoting the materials that you have there, because I see that a lot of companies, they have a really good knowledge basis, but nobody uses that because they just don't know that this stuff exists there, or it's
Yeah.
too complicated to actually look.
We're just approaching the end of the session, actually, and we've had some questions come in about
Yep.
documentation. So let's see how quickly we can zip through these. The first question is, what should the level of detail be for documentation?
So this is also I actually made a survey on LinkedIn last week, and like 30% of the replies was that they have the documentation, but this is TLDR, too long, didn't read stuff. it's also if actually having too big documentation is an issue as well, because it becomes too complicated. And once again, I think that uh, if you have a complicated system, and actually maintaining it will be a project on itself to have this detail, um, it's you might think about hiring a additional person to handle only the documentation if you want to have this kind of detail. But usually, what's enough is have the documentation that is big enough that people know what's inside, but they don't necessarily knew every single thing that it's there, right? So you know that the information is there, and you can reach it anytime you need, right?
Yeah, super interesting. I think you've also covered one of the other questions, which is what are your thoughts on how specialist tech writers can help? So I think there you were saying there is a case for specialist tech writers if you have a large amount of documentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think this kind of ownership that the team should have this kind of culture of writing the documentation, right? And this should always be there, that people actually think about updating it, because otherwise it will not work, or maybe it will become asynchronous quite fast. But if you want to create a good documentation, I think that you need one person that actually creates a story out of that. Not sure if technical writer is a good name for it, because what I rather like is like having a normal writer. We actually have one PM that also writes books, and he writes a very good documentation because he really takes all of those elements that people create from different perspectives, because QAs create the different documentations, DevOps create different documentation, architects, everybody creates some pieces of information, right? But then you have to bind it together somehow. And this is good to have this role, that actually somebody that can make a story out of it, and make it readable. This is, I think, the best way to approach this topic.
Yeah. Well, and going back to developers maintaining, being responsible for their own documentation, how do you
Yep.
carve time out of a developer's day? If it's maybe the last thing they want to do, how do you make sure that developers are prioritizing documentation into their day?
Yeah, so this is a matter of culture. It is challenging. I think that this is the same. We had a very similar situation with automated tests in the company. So at the beginning, we said, like a couple of years ago, we said, okay, so we need to have some code coverage with automated tests, right? And the people said like, oh my God, how do you carve time for this? We're never gonna make it. It will take us so long. It is not possible, right? But after some time, people just realized that actually this speeds up some things, but just in the other manner, right? But actually, now people learned to do the automated tests so fast and so good that they cannot imagine doing the development without this unit tests, right? And there is no longer the discussion about carving a time, because this is just a task, right?
It's part of
And
the job.
I think it's just part of the job, right? And actually, this is something that we should do, and that's all. And I think that this is the same with the documentation. But of course, there is this learning moment that you have to invest, right? And this will probably take a couple of months for people to actually learn how to do stuff. reiterate how we approach the documentation, what is important, what is not important. So if you want to introduce this kind of documentation culture in your company, you will probably need to invest a couple of months and well, cut this time for this. Just deal with it, and this will probably be like 20% of the time. But later on, you will actually have a time. There will be no discussion about carving time for this anymore.
Yeah, I just need to jump in. We need to wrap up the session. Thank you so much, Marek. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. It's been a fantastic session.